Czarny loot. I remember that I was days away from beginning kindergarten near the end of the summer of '88. My mother had already gone back to teaching at the community college, so my older sister and I were sent to my great aunt Cecilia's house over on Brown Street. My great aunt was the daughter of Polish immigrants and was married to an incredible old school Italian. Uncle Franco was still working at Lester's Shoe and Boot at the time, so it was usually just the three of us. Aunt Cecilia loved to garden. She had a huge yard and grew every vegetable that was suitable for the Northeast. The rear of the yard ended with several enclosed blueberry bushes and a small creek or crick, as we called it growing up. She was always out in that garden, and my sister and I would help her occasionally, but she was meticulous and wasn't keen on 7 5-year-old kids messing about in her precious ordered rows. That summer was unbelievably warm for upstate New York. We could only stand being outside in the yard for about an hour before returning to the house. It was the beginning of September, and my sister Jenny and I were basically stuck inside. We weren't allowed to walk to the park to do arts and crafts or go swimming. There were no other kids on Brown Street, and worst of all, my uncle and aunt didn't have cable TV. We watched Captain Kangaroo, Mr. Rogers, and Bob Ross every day that week. Jenny and I played a version of hide and seek where when she found me, she would beat the crap out of me. My pained howls for assistance would rarely find my elderly aunt's ear out back in the yard, and I'd have to endure the torture or try and negotiate with my budding sadist for a sister. It was odd. My screams rarely reached the garden through the many open windows of Aunt Cecilia's house, but if we were running around the table in the dining room or jumping on the couch in the parlor, you could set a watch to Aunt Cecilia materializing out of thin air to punish us. Not that she spanked us, but she had her ways of convincing us to act right, while also being one of the sweetest people I've ever known. So it was only days away from the first day of school, and Jenny and I were alone in the house running around and playing tag because we were too old to be entertained by the likes of Sesame Street. Aunt Cecilia came in from the garden with a pail of blueberries in hand, ready to scold us for our behavior. By this time, she seemed a little extra sick of our horseplay. Oh, no, 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 this is very bad. You too will awaken the Zarnilood with this naughtiness, said Cecilia. Sit on your dupa, Jennifer. Jenny obediently sat on the floor. Aunt Cecilia, what's the Zarnilood? He feeds on the fear of young children instead of on eggs and cold chicken from the fridge. But you shouldn't worry. You two behave for the next couple of days, and I'll keep him fed. I know how to tide him over, said Cecilia, lifting the pail of blueberries. You're good children. He won't have any reason to come for you. My sister was curious, while I was content with not knowing another thing about the Zarni loot. The three of us went for a walk down Main Street, and Jenny asked Aunt Cecilia question after question about the boogeyman. But Aunt Cecilia only said that it inhabited dark places like the root room and the cellar, then changed the subject. Our mother picked us up that evening, and we asked her about the Zarni loot, but she had no idea what we were talking about, and surprisingly, our aunt hadn't bothered to tell her that we had been a handful that day. Jenny wouldn't drop it, though, and the more we chatted about it, the more I grew frightened of the thing that lived in my aunt's basement. I had seen the empty pail when Aunt Cecilia returned from the cellar, and wondered if she had really fed some mysterious creature with berries from her yard. I knew there were mysterious things in the world, as I was familiar with the fat man who delivered presents while negotiating our basement furnace, the rabbit with a penchant for discarded teeth, and the man whose flesh and blood my parents consumed each week. And I'd been having a recurring nightmare since watching Disney's Mr. Boogedy about a shadow man that occupied my parents' bedroom closet. So it seemed entirely plausible, if not likely, that my beloved aunt was defending my sister and me from some ancient diabolical force which occupied the root room in her cellar with fresh blueberries from her yard. The following morning, I asked my mom if there was any way we could go to my grandma's house instead of to my aunt's. She quickly shot down that idea. My sister had overheard our conversation and immediately called me chicken, laughing at my genuine worry all the way to Aunt Cecilia's. Luckily, it was raining, so my aunt didn't leave us alone in the house that morning. However, my luck ran out, as it cleared up after lunch and Aunt Cecilia was itching to get to work in her garden. I did my best to stay outside, watching my aunt prune her blueberry bushes. But after an hour or so, Jenny was whining about the bugs and wanted to go inside and play board games. Likely so she wouldn't have to listen to my sister, Aunt Cecilia ordered me into the house to play checkers. I dragged my feet to the parlor and sat down and played a few different games, each of which I lost miserably. Hey, this is really boring. Let's go down in the cellar, said Jenny, grinning. No, let's play Connect 4. Come on, I'll show you that there's nothing down there, stated Jenny assuredly. In 2 days, you'll be in elementary school. You can't go to school being scared of. I'm not scared of everything. She pinched my arm and I yelled. Why'd you do that? Joey, if you don't go down to the basement with me just for a minute, I'm going to make sure all of the second graders beat you up every day. I thought about it for a few moments, even considered the likelihood that she could sway most of her classmates to do her bidding, but ultimately, I let her drag me through the kitchen and down to our aunt's dank concrete basement. I've been down there plenty of times while Aunt Cecilia washed clothes by hand, then strained them using her antique mechanical washing equipment. She had an electric washer, but I'd never seen her hurt it running. Let's just have a quick look in the root cellar, said Jenny. I stood my ground in the middle of the room beside stacks of mason jars. I wasn't opening anything. Please, Jenny, don't. Joey, I'm going to open the store and show you that there's nothing in there. What happened to all the berries in Aunt Celia's pail then? Look around, Joey. She sticks them in jars. It's called jamming. She turned the bottom latch ring on the thin wooden door. The door was secured by two latches with twisting rings. Neither latch was locked, as you would have to place an additional lock on each ring to secure the door. Jenny couldn't quite reach the upper latch. While she searched for a box or stool to stand on, we heard footsteps in the kitchen above. We left the root room behind and began sneaking up the stairs to try and slip into the kitchen. But the upstairs door opened while we were on the top landing and we were caught. Jennifer, Joseph, get in here, said Cecilia, who sat us at the kitchen table. I'm very disappointed in you two. She eyed me, and I could feel the weight of her disappointment. Joey, why would you go down to the cellar? I'm sorry, Aunt Cecilia. Jenny made me. My sister glared at me, and I knew I'd pay later and instantly regretted tattling. This is your last chance. The next time I catch you two in the basement or even acting up, you're going to have to spend an hour in the root cellar with the Czarny loot. My father locked me in the dark when I was a little younger than Joey. I can tell you I learned my lesson. I practically gasped at the thought of it. My sister even seemed to have been moved by the threat, as her own apology sounded genuine for once. We were angels for the rest of the afternoon. It was the afternoon before my first day of kindergarten. We were at Aunt Cecilia's counting down the hours until our mother returned. We were laughing at Bob Ross as he seemed to be ruining a nice landscape painting he had made with extra flourishes. Our aunt was out back, and we were calmly sitting on the covered sofa. There was something about the monotony of the day that just ate away at my sister. She couldn't help it, she just couldn't sit still. Jenny would kick and slap me for no good reason and try and get me to wrestle with her so she could pin me to the floor. I loved running wild, playing, but I was also perfectly content with sitting and staring at the TV for hours. Let's play tag. You're it. I didn't immediately jump up and chase her as I knew it would lead to roughhousing and eventually to Aunt Cecilia appearing like clockwork to chastise us. But it was the day before my first day of school, and I was a little nervous about it. It had been the longest summer that I could remember, an epic summer that seemed never ending, packed with activities and vacations, fun times with friends and family. I can't really explain how I thought about things at 5. It was just easier to say fuck it. and run after my sister when she wanted to go off and have 10 minutes of unbridled fun tearing through the house until we were yelled at and given lengthy timeouts. It wasn't long before I had tagged Jenny and she was chasing me around the dining room table. I sort of tossed a chair behind me as I passed, which made her stumble and fall. But when she fell, she grabbed the woven tablecloth covering to catch herself, which caused the glass vase that sat in the center of the table to come crashing to the floor. It broke into a few large pieces on the hard wood, and I locked eyes with my sister for a moment as we shared a fearful anticipation of the repercussions to follow. As Jenny then gathered the vase's plastic flowers from the floor and I stood up the overturned chair, Aunt Cecilia stormed into the room yelling. Her tirade began in Polish, was broken up by English, but her intentions were clear when she put her hands on us. She was taking us to the cellar. Aunt Celia, we're sorry. It was an accident, I howled, already in tears. My sister wasn't crying, but she was generally pleading for my aunt's forgiveness. Jenny could be a rotten, spoiled, sadistic witch, but she too loved our aunt wholeheartedly and knew that we'd made her angrier than we'd ever seen her. But Aunt Cecilia's demeanor changed then. She no longer looked angry, more so stern, and calmly marched us down to the basement. And as we stood in front of the dark, barren root room in the cellar, the elderly woman spoke to us in a way that made it seem like she believed that this is what had to be done out of duty, whether or not she had reservations regarding the punishment itself. Well, I was 5 and having none of it. I practically screamed myself ragged, and oddly, my screaming and the fact that I was exuding terror from every pore seemed to give my sister strength. Some manner of change affected her then. Some sort of long dormant reservoir of compassion welled in her heart. She offered herself to martyrdom on my behalf. Aunt Celia, I was chasing Joe and I knocked over the vase. He wasn't being bad. It's my fault. Celia sighed. Jennifer, that vase belonged to my mother and your great grandmother. It was a family heirloom, something that reminded me of our family home in Poland. If you broke it, you can take the punishment for your brother. Now sit on the stool. I'm going to close the door for 1 full hour. Cecilia walked Jenny into the root room and had her sit beneath some empty wooden shelves that held maybe half a dozen dusty mason jars. She grabbed a second stool and placed it outside the room, then retrieved a mechanical alarm clock from my uncle's workbench. Joey, you sit here for the hour. I'm going back out to the garden. Do not open the door until the bell rings. If you do so before, you're going in by yourself. With that, she closed and secured my sister in that windowless, cobwebbed closet, then handed me the clock and went back upstairs. It was fairly dark in the basement itself. The small half windows illuminated the stairwell and laundry area fine, but I sat far enough away that it was difficult just making out the Nike swooshes on my own sneakers. I was nervous and anxious for myself, and couldn't imagine the dread I'd be feeling if I were in my sister's place. What's it like in there, Jenny? Dark, and it smells like Grandma's bed. We laughed nervously together, and even joked for the first quarter hour. Then Jenny suddenly went silent. After a minute or so, when she didn't respond to my banter, I stood up from my stool only feet from the thin wooden door and listened. I thought I could hear panting from within the root room, like a dog was just on the other side of the door. Maybe even the low grumbling that a dog makes when caught up in a dream. Was that you, Jenny? She didn't immediately respond, but when she did, her voice had dropped to a barely audible whisper. Joey, shh. I figured the heavy breathing was her, but wasn't sure about the deeper sound. Is your stomach grumbling? No, just be quiet, she said curtly. I held my breath for half a minute and listened. I could hear someone shifting around in the room. Did you just move? No. Are you walking around out there or something? No, I'm just standing here by the door. I looked over each shoulder and into the dark corners of the basement momentarily, considering if I was the one in danger. I soon sat back on the stool quietly and cradled the clock, listening to the strange sounds that emanated from the root room. 5 to 10 minutes passed this way before I heard my sister whisper,
"Joey, there's something in here with me."
"What is it?" I practically yelled.
"I think it scratched me when I asked if you were walking around, but then it left after I was quiet for a while. I'm not going to say anything else until the alarm goes off. Just please don't leave, Joey."
"Really? What is it?" I asked. But Jenny didn't respond. Not long after, I heard a low growling from inside the room that my sister occupied. I backed up from the door and considered retrieving my aunt, but I was stuck between my fear of receiving the same punishment as my sister, had I gotten my aunt, and my youthful skepticism regarding the authenticity of the sounds coming from within the room. My sister liked to scare me, and had gone to great lengths in doing so over the course of our childhoods. I nearly panicked and backed toward the stairs when I heard a shuffling from within the root closet. Then I heard glass tumble and break and practically jumped onto the staircase, ready to make my escape. "Jenny, are you okay? Did the shelf fall?" And as I said it, the wooden door itself began shaking as if it were trembling from whatever horror that was taking place inside. But I couldn't leave her, no matter what. She had saved me from experiencing whatever was taking place within the dark cellar room. I remained still, prone on the staircase, silent, and the door eventually ceased trembling and the noises waned, and I slowly crept back to my place of vigil on the stool. I couldn't exactly tell time, and was just waiting on that bell to chime so I could free my sister. As I waited, terror bawled in my drying throat, the likes of which I wouldn't feel again until my first night at Army boot camp. I jumped up and immediately twisted the bottom latch, then retrieved my stool so I could reach the top latch, and though it took longer than I would have liked, I finally twisted and yanked the latch free from the ring. I feared the worst as I rushed to free Jenny. The door was light and it flew open in my over-exuberant tug. My sister shuffled out, rubbing her eyes as she got used to the natural light from the cellar windows. Her pale glazed expression was indescribable. To this day, I still say she came out a different person. "What happened?" I asked, as I peeked into the small root room. Broken glass from 6 or so mason jars littered the floor. None remained on the seemingly intact shelving. "Did you accidentally knock over those empty jars?" She looked me up and down, and for a brief moment it felt as if she had to recall who I was. "The jars weren't empty when I went in." "Huh? What's up with your arm?" I grabbed her forearm and pointed out a long scratch, not exactly deep, but certainly fresh. "Joey, the jars were full of blueberries when I went in." "It ate them." I asked Jenny a million questions that day and the days after, but she didn't go into much detail regarding her time inside the root room. She didn't say much to Aunt Cecilia about her time in the room either, but it was like they didn't have to talk about it. Jenny had learned something about herself that day. When I asked her about the room from time to time, Jenny would simply say that the Czarny was very real. Soon enough, we were fully invested in our elementary school lives and only saw our beloved great Aunt Cecilia on holidays and at birthdays. While the memory of those days near the tail end of the summer of '88 really stuck with me because of what I didn't know, the opposite seemed to be true for my sister. My parents were bewildered for some time by the sudden change. Why their once fearless daughter now refused to enter dark rooms and wouldn't sleep with the light off until her early teenage years.